Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event for the Bowmanville West Urban Center Secondary Plan. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. My name is Zara Jaffer. I'm a planner and engagement specialist with Dillon Consulting Limited. We're the firm hired by the municipality to support the planning and community engagement for this project, and we're excited to be here with you tonight. So just a note, the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be shared on the project website. So if you happen to need to step away or you miss part of the event and you need to catch up, you can definitely do so there later on. So welcome and thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and invite you all to reflect on this with us. The municipality of Clarington is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas and Chippewas of the Anishinaabe, known today as the Williams Treaties First Nations. Our work on these lands acknowledges their resilience and their long-standing contributions to the area now known as the municipality of Clarington. So with us tonight are a number of project team members from the Municipality of Clarington and from the consulting team. We have Lisa Backus, the Manager of Community Planning, as well as Karen Richardson, the Manager of Development Engineering. And from the consulting team, along with me, we have Patty Kennedy, who is the lead planner and a partner with Dillon Consulting. So I'd like to take a moment and just welcome Lisa to say a few words and open the meeting for us.
Thanks, Zara. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for choosing to spend your evening with us, even if it's only a couple hours. We certainly are very appreciative of that. Planning and Infrastructure Services staff are very confident that you will find the information that Zara and Patty and staff present to you tonight is very informative. I'd like to reiterate, and I apologize for having to do this, but I would like to reiterate that this meeting is about the Bowmanville West Secondary Plan. It's not about the GO station, although we have received lots of information, lots of questions from you about the GO train extension. Please be assured all the information we receive and questions from you, we will pass it on to the Metrolink staff, but tonight's focus will be about the secondary plan. We will look forward to receiving your comments on the draft secondary plan when it's released in the coming months. Thank you very much and enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Lisa. All right, so we're definitely looking forward to an evening of sharing and learning with you. So to start us off, we're going to have an overview presentation with the key highlights of the recommended approach to planning for Bowmanville West and the Urban Center. And then we'll have about 45 minutes to an hour to take your questions and have a bit of a discussion on the direction forward. So just a reminder on the Zoom functions. So this is a webinar, so you'll be able to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. If you have comments, you can feel free to share them there as well. And we'll also be sharing contact information where you can send your comments either by email, or if you have another preference, you'd like to pick up the phone and have a phone conversation, that might also be an option. So we're always happy to hear from you, and we'll be sharing options for how you can get in touch as well. But for purposes of tonight, please do use the Q&A panel to send us your questions, and we'll be taking them once the presentation is complete. So we do have some in-session polling as well. And so just to get us started and warmed up, we'd like to get to know you a little bit. And so I'm going to launch a couple of polls. The first one is, we're just looking to know where you're joining us from tonight. Do you live in Bowmanville West? Do you live somewhere else in Clarington? Do you live not in Clarington, but somewhere else in Durham Region? Or are you joining us from outside Durham Region tonight? So I'll give folks just a few seconds here, and then we'll share those results with you. Okay, so it looks like we've got a pretty great mix. Quite a number of folks, about half of our attendees are in Bowmanville West, and another 28% are elsewhere in Clarington. We have about a handful that are elsewhere in Durham region and a few that are outside the region as well. So joining us from all over, thank you and welcome. The next poll that we'd like to share is just giving us a sense of your familiarity with the project and with the secondary plan. So have you participated in any previous events for the Bowmanville West Urban Center Secondary Plan? Yes, no. It has been a little while since we started, so you may not remember. That's okay too. But we're just looking to know how many folks might be joining us for the first time and hearing some new information for the very first time. Okay, so it looks like quite a few new folks. Only about the 30% of our attendees have been here before or have participated in an event before. So we're looking forward to sharing some new information and certainly taking your questions as well. So welcome. All right, so with that, we are going to get into the presentation, and I'd like to welcome Patty Kennedy, the lead consultant from Dillon Consulting, to kick that off for us.
Thank you, Zara. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I have a few context slides to go through first to kind of set the tone and walk you through a little bit of the history and background behind the project. And given we do have a good number of folks who are visiting the project for the first time, it's probably worthwhile to spend a bit of time just going back a little bit before we go forward. And at the back half of the presentation, we'll dive into some details about what the concept plans are for Bowmanville West Secondary Plan. So if we want to go to the next slide. This process we've been going on, it's a three-phase process. The first phase of work was really about trying to understand the issues, the opportunities, and the constraints in Bowmanville West area. And we had a couple of PICs, and that work culminated in a background report that's posted online, and you can visit that if you'd like to know more information about some of the underlying concepts or background information or some details. You may find some nuggets in there. Ultimately, that work, what it allowed us to do was give us a bit of a platform to build a new longer term vision for the Bowmanville West area. And that was what phase two was all about. We had an in-person visioning exercise and a series of workshops around trying to imagine how this area could change and evolve over time. In 2021, we had the opportunity to present for the first time some initial concept plans at a virtual PIC. And what we're going to be doing tonight is, some of that content is in the presentation again tonight, but share a little bit of things that have changed and essentially try to lay a foundation for when we release the draft of the secondary plan and zoning bylaw in the final phase of the project, which is we're very close to doing, at least for those who are accessing the project for the first time, have a sense of understanding of the background that led up to the creation of the draft plan and zoning bylaw before we just release it out into the world. So we are at our fifth public information center for this project. The next round of engagement will be a public meeting under the Planning Act at Council, where well in advance of that meeting, we will have released the zoning bylaw and the secondary plan for public review. And that'll be an opportunity at that public meeting to give any formal feedback on the plan. So that's the process. There's a few things that have happened since we've last met, some changes. Certainly, if you're a bit of a planning junkie, you'll know that the province released Bill 23 last year in the fall, the More Homes Built Faster Act in 2022. It's a piece of legislation that has broad sweeping changes to a number of, not only the Planning Act, but a whole bunch of other acts that inform how development occurs in municipalities. And so there are aspects of that legislation that inform our implementation policies and a few other components of the plan. So when we release the secondary plan, we'll be able to incorporate some of those changes. Of course, we have the region of Durham had adopted their own official plan amendment 186. This was the direction for how planning around major transit station areas is expected to occur across the region. And of course, the region continues to work on its broader growth management framework under Envision Durham as well. working in parallel to our work is Metrolink's work on the Lakeshore East Go extension to Bowmanville. And so these two projects are working in parallel as well. And I have a few slides to talk a little bit about what we know, what the latest is on that. So the secondary plan area here you see in red, it's 126 hectares. This is what we call the major transit station area. It is the whole area in red. The transit station itself is that where the GO station is expected to go is in blue on the map. The term major transit station area is a very specific term. It's defined by the province. There's probably hundreds of them across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. They are the lands approximately 500 to 800 meters around higher order transit station areas. And the province has a number of policies where they're intending to influence the shape and type of development around these higher order transit station areas. One of the key things they hope to achieve, municipalities to achieve rather, is to plan these areas for a minimum density of 150 people and jobs per hectare. Go to the next slide. The next question you may ask yourself is, why is planning around major transit station areas like a matter of provincial interest? Why is it important? Generally, there is a significant infrastructure agenda underway across the Greater Golden Horseshoe, with the province investing billions of dollars to extend and modernize the rapid transit network to make it easier for people to move around this broader region called the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And so it's really important that to make that investment work, that we have really good ridership for transit around stations. So the idea that we have more people living and working in close proximity to where the stations are, we can influence and increase the ridership potential and have a good return on that significantly large capital investment. So the province provides guidance to municipalities through its own provincial plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which is called A Place to Grow. It's a number of policies to guide municipalities on how to plan around major transit station areas. And because we're in a bit of a top-down planning oriented system where the province provides guidance through its plan, and then the region has to update their plans to conform to it, and so on and so forth into Clarington's official plan. And that is where the plan for Bowmanville West comes into play. It is an opportunity to plan and implement both provincial and regional objectives, but also address a number of the opportunities and issues that we've continued to dialogue with you folks on through the planning process here. You may be curious if you are someone who likes to know about numbers and that sort of thing. Along the way, the region, through its own work in planning its the major transit station area networks across the region, they had identified that the area had potential for approximately 7,000 new units, or 13,300 people in Bowmanville West MTSA. It's not the be all and end all or the final number that the area is to be planned for. That is going to be informed by a number of other things, but generally there is a sense that this area has quite a bit of potential for future growth and intensification over time, not just from a policy perspective, but from a physical perspective. And some of our background work in the background reports online do get into the numbers in a little bit more detail. From a Metrolink's perspective, I'm sure most are aware who are attending this meeting that Metrolinks does have plans to expand and provide two-way all-day GO service to Bowmanville along the Lakeshore East Corridor. The idea is that Metrolinks will be conducting a number of improvements along this corridor to get it ready for extension of services. At this time, and from a process perspective, we understand that Metrolinks is through its initial business case process and now in the preliminary design case process, where they are working through sort of how to design the station, and of particular importance, we're aware they're working on now from their last update is finding a construction partner for this piece of work. And if we go to the next slide, why that is an important step in the process is that because the large number of transit investments going on across the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the province is trying to balance those interests between making purely public investments and looking for opportunities to manage the the burden on the tax base. So they haven't introduced a new approach to developing their stations, which is to partner with landowners and developers to help them develop the lands around the station or merely on the station site. So what you see here on this slide, we presented this last time as an example, is the Mimico Go, a concept plan for the new Mimico Go station in Toronto. And what you see here is a mixed use development right on top of the station, with the developer helping fund the capital investment for the station in exchange for sort of the development rights on the site that Metrolinx happened to own. So if we go to the next slide, can sort of begin to talk a little bit about what this all means for Bowmanville West. Well, from a transit perspective, purely under this market-driven approach to station funding, it means that the land uses, the densities, the heights, all the permissions that we plan for in the MTSA, they're an important part in overall investment attractors to finding an investor to help fund and build the station. The means that, you know, from a station perspective as well, that the whole idea of what a transit station could look like in the future is really different than maybe the mental model we have in our mind based on, you know, how historically they have been designed. And so this new approach requires greater emphasis on urban design, on how, you know, the facilities look and feel. It has a greater emphasis on how people get to the station. It isn't simply about driving your car, parking in the lot and jumping on the train. It's about prioritizing a whole range of different modes around walking, cycling, rolling, and even taking local transit to get to the station. And so the integration of all these modes becomes really important in Metrolinx's approach to station design and its approach to selecting a partner. More broadly, beyond sort of the station site and whatever development may occur on that particular site, the overall lands in our Bowmanville West major transit station area, what it means for those lands is that we need to plan them for broad range of mid and high rise development to provide the density to support the station. It means that we want to have a diverse mixture of land uses, not just residential, but also opportunities for office, commercial, and support services. And so we sort of start thinking about building the area out as a complete community. And certainly, as I alluded to earlier, having access of all modes in and around the station becomes critical to making all the riders have seamless access to transit and sort of minimize the barriers to access. So I'll pause here. That's just the background and context. And I believe the next part of our presentation, Zara is just going to do a bit of a recap on some of the items that we have heard through the engagement process to date.
Great, thank you, Patty. So we're just going to share with you a little bit about what we've been hearing. As Patty mentioned, this is now the fifth public session that we're having for the project. And over the course of the last 4 sessions that we had about 280 or so residents that had attended. We also ran 3 online surveys, so had over 300 comments on various elements of planning and design for the Bowmanville West secondary plan area. And some of those key themes, so I'll share with you some of the broad themes, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail of what some of that specific feedback was. But we heard that we need to plan for infrastructure and servicing to support new growth, that we need to plan for more affordable housing, that managing the building heights and the impacts on the low-rise residential areas, both within and around Bowmanville West, is really important, and that we need to design for sustainability and climate change resilience, given all of the different things that are happening in the broader world, and the municipality of Clarington, as well as the region's goals around climate change action. We heard that we need to design for accessibility and plan for a range of open spaces and green spaces to accommodate both the existing residents and those who travel to and visit Bowmanville West, as well as future residents. And that traffic is a core concern and something that really needs to be managed, that we need to support commercial and retail growth and viability, and that we need to plan for multiple different ways for people to be able to access the GO station. And then when we get into a little bit more of the details, so around land use and intensification and starting to welcome more people into the community, that there was support for mixed use development, so a mix of residential as well as commercial and retail and institutional uses in the community, that taller buildings should be focused along the major corridors or major travel routes and closer to the GO station, and that definitely adequate parking is needed to limit overflow from the station into adjacent neighborhoods, that we need to manage the noise and traffic impacts and really think about housing diversity and affordable housing, including rental for future residents and existing residents, and thinking about where the recreational facilities are going to go, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but particularly parks as well as all of the different elements of personal services, for example, medical clinics and that type of thing, and that transitions between taller buildings and existing homes is something that needs to be paid attention to as we start to think about taller buildings being planned for in the community. And so in that context of thinking about urban design and placemaking, we also heard that there's a range of different types of gathering spaces that people would like to see for active uses as well as for just places for rest and for gathering, that we want to preserve the existing green spaces and that any new spaces that are designed should be barrier-free and designed for people with disabilities in mind. And then in terms of the mobility and the access through the area, that convenient access to the GO station for all users, whether they're walking, rolling, cycling, or driving, is crucial. And that we need a connected network of walking and cycling facilities to make sure that there is full connectivity throughout the community. And particularly on residential streets, that there is some traffic calming that's needed and some pedestrian crossing improvements. And we heard about a few specific intersections that would need some additional care. For example, the intersection of Clarington Boulevard and Prince William Boulevard along Green Road and along Bowmanville Avenue. So that gives you just kind of a broad overview of all of the different elements and key themes from what we heard. And all of that feedback helped to inform the planning and the design of the secondary plan and the zoning bylaw that Patty's going to be talking about next.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. If we go to the next slide, before we dive into some details, we'll talk a little bit about what a secondary plan is. Specifically, a secondary plan is a portion or neighborhood or group of neighborhoods in a municipality where you may want to prepare some more detailed plans to guide change. That is a level of detail that you might not be able to capture in a general set of policies in your official plan. And so municipalities often prepare secondary plans for areas of change, whether it's a clean slate in a new greenfield area that they might be developing, or an area of intensification that is more complicated and requires some thinking about how change is going to occur over time. And so typically what a secondary plan it would include is a vision statement and a series of objectives to be achieved. A main ingredient would be a more detailed land use plan, maybe some urban design guidelines that talk about how the development of both the public spaces, but also the private development comes forward, like what it's supposed to look like generally. So some specific principles there. It might identify any transportation improvements or infrastructure improvements, and a series of implementation policies to talk about how to and next steps. Now, secondary plans are still fairly high level, like they don't solve all the problems that might exist or all the issues, but they do try to foresee them and chart out kind of the steps involved into addressing them, such that as development occurs, that you can either phase in your infrastructure or phase in any additional studies or items that need to be addressed as part of the implementation program. So it is also worth noting that secondary plan is part of the official plan. So Clarington's current official plan has chapters that cover off these secondary plans, and that there is actually a secondary plan in place for the Bowmanville West area today. And our job is really about updating that plan. So if we go to the next slide, I think what I want to kind of talk about here on the left-hand side, you see a copy of the current land use plan. I wasn't going to go through it in any detail, but maybe just note that the original secondary plan goes back to 1993, and the original vision for the Bowmanville West area was to attract commercial investment into the area so we could have a more robust area for shopping and keep kind of the shopping spending dollars in Clarington and not have it flow out. And by and large, those original objectives from that 1993 plan have been achieved and surpassed. And over the intervening years, there has been some periodic updates to the secondary plan. And the last update started to begin to imagine what intensification could look like. And what you see on the right is one of the demonstration plans that was done in an envisioning exercise in the early 2000s around, what intensification might look like or how it could be spaced out in what had historically been developed as a big box area. Now, the main point I wanted to make about this slide is if you want to pause and think about maybe where you were in 1993, it's over 30 years ago. And that was just when the plan came in place essentially for the Bowmanville West area from a shopping perspective. And so now we're in 2023 and we're talking about a new vision. And so while it might sound or sometimes even feel like change is very rapid and it is always happening around us, there is quite a bit of runway in front of us that change. It's going to take time for some of the visionary items we're talking about to take place. And so, for example, like the density target we talked about earlier in our presentation, that's a build out density. It doesn't have a timeline associated with it. It is sort of 2051 and beyond. So we are talking about another generation or two of change before the policies and the vision that put forth in this updated plan are likely to take place. Now, what the overall vision essentially for the Bowmanville West is to continue to maintain that shopping function, but to have a high quality urban environment with accessible public spaces, high density development with good access in and around the transit station, and so that we are developing a complete community in Bowmanville West to support the GO station. And so what you just see here is an image that is sort of a quick rendering of Highway 2 and some of that mid-rise development fronting the street, healthy urban tree canopy, variety of modes moving through the area. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the planning elements that are supporting the secondary plan. Affordable housing is a really critical element that the secondary plan is looking to encourage. And so it's going to do this through a number of ways, not only providing for opportunity for a mix of housing types and a diverse range of households, but also providing direction for any enabling studies that can be done to either incentivize opportunities for more affordable housing or to implement opportunities for inclusionary zoning and that sort of thing. The policy framework is there in the plan to address that and encourage more opportunities for affordable housing. So the draft land use plan, it is a little similar to the last version we released, but there are some nuances and some changes. And I know there's folks seeing this for the first time, so maybe I'll just walk through the land use plan there. And there are a few slides that'll go through the categories in detail. But generally, there are sort of four types of land uses prescribed in the land use plan. The purple lands, which are intended to be the densest uses around the transit station. You have the pink areas that are intended to be sort of higher density mixed use development for a range of 6 to 12 stories in height. We have some freestanding, in orange are sites for freestanding high density residential uses. And the yellow is intended to be that transitional space between the established neighborhoods and the more taller forms of development. If we go to the next slide, would acknowledge that there are lands that are already developed and that it's going to be, unlikely in this generation of the plan that they're able to achieve some of the maximum height permissions in there. And that's what you see hatched here. And so there probably be some exceptions in the zoning bylaw and the secondary plan that talk about the difference between the height limits on the ground today from an existing built form perspective and what's permitted in the future. Yeah, that's fine. So we'll just use some imagery to kind of capture the essence. I mean, this is a more intense form than what we have in mind, certainly for the transit station area. From a height perspective, we're talking about sort of 12 to 18 stories on the lands that are designated for as mixed use high density for the transit station area and surrounding lands, but it would allow the transit station, it would allow for office, retail, service, commercial, mid-rise, high-rise residential uses, entertainment uses, institutions, basically the broadest range of uses that one could imagine would be permitted on those lands. If we go to the next slide, we'll take a quick shot at the mixed use high density designation. What you see here is an image of that for these lands that have this designation. The expectation here is that they're not as dense as what we would see in close proximity to the station, but nonetheless in that sort of 6 to 12 story range, that they would have strong emphasis on pedestrian orientation, and so ground floor commercial, upper story residential. And the sites that are identified for freestanding high density res, those sites are basically have maybe not as well positioned for commercial or mixed use development because of some of the site access and visibility components. So they're identified for high density res, sort of the 8 to 12 story range. And finally, at least from a built form perspective, in terms of the land use typologies, we have the residential medium density designation, and its primary function is to allow for some intensification, but also provide that transition in height and scale between essentially the lands to the north, south, east, and west that are pretty much built out, and that we're trying to be mindful of the transitions in height and density in these locations. The final piece in the land use typology, of course, is the parks and community facilities designation, and this one captures existing community facilities as well as planned parks and public spaces in the schedule. And that's going to be a critical component, is not only these lands, but some of the other public realm improvement components I'm going to talk to you about in a minute, and sort of building and stitching together that complete community. If we have a sort of the scale of development that's planned for, it's really important that we have a supporting network of parks and public spaces for people to recreate and play. From an urban design perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about urban design. This slide here is really about the design of the private realm and how private lands are developed. Secondary plan will have policies around to guide the shape and character of development, and so it'll have guidance on things like our podium and tower step backs and setbacks. It'll have guidance on minimum tower separation distances and floor plate sizes, as well as guidelines for sun and shadow impacts on adjacent uses, and those will be used as those development applications come in, that staff can use those to guide it, but also the developers can understand, from first blush, what some of the principles are that the municipality is trying to achieve. From a public realm perspective, so the public realm is what we define as basically the streets, the parks, the institutional uses, things that the municipality, either Clarington or Durham or Metrolinx, are responsible for planning and developing. And so our typology looks at sort of 4 big things in terms of looking for improvement in Bowmanville West. We're talking about ways to improve the streetscape environment, new public spaces, how to enhance gateway areas, and pedestrian improvements. So if we go to the next slide, the concept plan identifies in 2 dimension the location of these main elements. So you will see, for example, 3 major gateway areas located on this map. One gateway being that sort of transit gateway on the GO station site. Could be on the other side. It'll depend ultimately on how the station is designed, but the idea is that that transit station is a major gateway, as well as the intersections of Clarington Boulevard, Highway 2, and Bowmanville Ave, and Highway 2 being the 3 kind of main entrance ways, and then a series of minor gateways throughout. The hashed lines you see are different types of streetscape improvements intended. So the major corridors will have more enhanced treatment, and the more local roads have lesser treatments. But nonetheless, the idea is that they all are improved and treated for both for pedestrian comfort, but also for access and mobility. You'll also note on here our series of one of the elements we've added, I think, since the last time we met, are these green future linear parks pedestrian boulevard areas, and some of the local streets to the north and south of Highway 2. We're looking to improve and widen those boulevard areas so that there's opportunities not only for enhanced streetscaping, but also perhaps for some publicly accessible private open spaces along the way. And if we go to the next slide, just a few images to sort of wrap up to sort of visualize a little bit about what the change could look like. So around when we talk about streetscape improvement, talking about maybe a complete street design approach. So both what's in the right of way and then what's on the edge of the right of way, and recognizing it's a transit station area is going to be, very unique but challenging exercise to always to design and improve the roads to accommodate the different users that are going to be moving through the area. The next slide, if we go to that, this one is more intended to kind of capture the idea of those linear parks or pedestrian boulevards, just the essence of wider spaces. There are maybe more pedestrian or rolling focused with a really healthy tree canopy. So the elements you see in this image are, you'll note there's no cars, you'll note there's double row of trees, it's wide, lots of room for people to move, and it can function as both a corridor but also as a public space. And in this image, the last thing I believe we wanted to touch on, there's two more slides I believe. The last one from maybe a broader design perspective to highlight is this one sort of brings together both the public realm and the private realm together. And this is kind of illustrating how all the parts fit together. So we do want our buildings facing the street and integrating the street. And if we design those streetscapes to be attractive, functioning, to accommodate the variety of users, we can build a pretty high quality public realm. And throughout the process, what we had heard all along the way was, opportunities also for green building design and sustainable design. So the design guidelines encourage a variety of different sustainable forms of development, whether it's rain gardens or energy efficient buildings or green roofs, or whether these things apply to both parks and public spaces, but also to the actual buildings themselves. So that concludes the highlights of the concept plans, and hopefully gives you a preview of what you'll see when we release the draft secondary plan document in the associated zoning bylaw in the coming months ahead. I'll now pass it over to Lisa, I think, for next steps.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Zara. That was a lot of information. Great to receive it all, and you explained that in very simple terms, so we certainly appreciate that. So as we've discussed, we are in phase 3, and this is the final phase of the secondary plan. This phase will include the preparation of a draft secondary plan and a draft zoning bylaw to be presented to council and the public at a statutory public meeting. We anticipate that this will happen before summer recess. The public meeting, which is held at the Planning and Development Committee of Council meeting, provides an opportunity for the public to present their comments, concerns, and support, should they choose, for the secondary plan. It's also the opportunity for council to discuss the draft secondary plan. Following the statutory public meeting, staff will assess any comments that have been received, not only from council, the public, and any of the agencies that are circulated, such as Conservation Authority, regions, school boards, etc., and make any necessary modifications to the secondary plan. Staff will then recommend to council that the secondary plan be adopted. This again will include another public engagement opportunity. And all of you folks that have signed up for this evening or signed up in the past to be part of our interested parties list, you will receive notifications of all of these activities happening. And following adoption of the secondary plan by Clarington Council, the secondary plan will be forwarded to the region of Durham, as the region of Durham is the approval authority, not only for our secondary plans, but also the Clarington official plan. Zara?
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can get involved, stay involved in terms of the project. So first of all, now that you've heard a whole bunch of information and some of those things, maybe things that you actually came here to learn, I'm just going to pop up a quick poll, and we'd just like to know how you're feeling about everything that you've heard so far. So did you come and hear all of the things about the key topics that you are interested in? Do you still have more questions? In which case you're absolutely in the right place and we're looking forward to taking your questions about the secondary plan. Or do you also have specific questions about the Metrolinx plan for the GO station itself specifically, as well as the rail expansion? And as Lisa mentioned, any questions that you share with us that are related to the GO station and rail expansion will be shared with Metrolinx after this session. And so we're certainly happy to share any information that you give to us or questions. Okay, so looks like a little bit of a mix. Certainly quite a few questions for Metrolinx that are outstanding. That's okay. Glad to hear that we were able to share some information on some key topics that folks are interested in. And we're absolutely looking forward to staying on and taking your questions and making sure that you come away with all of the information that you're able to get this evening, as well as in the follow-up that we'll be sharing as part of any questions we're not able to take tonight. So just quickly, if you are looking for project updates about the secondary plan after this meeting, I will ask my colleague Dustin, who is with us in the background, to just share the email address and project website for you in the chat so you can have that and be able to access it for future reference. Of course, Lisa and Amy, who is not with us this evening, but is also a key planner on this project file, are open to taking your questions by email if you would have any about the secondary plan, the zoning bylaw, the process, etc. Those are your key contacts for those elements of the project. And for elements related to the GO station and the service expansion to Bowmanville, Metrolinx has a website as well as an email. You can subscribe to their newsletter for updates. And you can also attend one of the pop-up events that they're going to have slated for the next several weeks. So there are 3 of them within Clarington, and then there are 3 more across the region. So you can certainly attend one of those if you'd like to meet a Metrolinx staff member in person and share your questions to be put on the record with them as well. So we're looking forward to staying in touch with you, and any questions that we are able to answer and discuss with you about the secondary plan, we are here for it.